"Sir, the basilisk is going down," exclaimed a terrified lieutenant, pointing to a nearby ship engulfed in flames and torn apart by explosions. Hearing the news, the captain stopped shouting orders to his panicking subordinates and fell into deep contemplative silence. Frantically looking around, his gaze landed on the young and inexperienced rear admiral nervously hiding behind a wall of displays. "Sir, the flagship and the admiral have been lost in action. You are now in command." "What are your orders?" said the old captain with an undertone of disgust and contempt, as the Davan male in front of him barely reached adulthood and got to that position simply because he was the son of some big shot. The bridge was dead quiet. Everyone was eagerly waiting for orders, staring right into the young officer's soul as bright flashes and explosions went off all around the scattered and confused formation of ships. Despite being promoted exclusively through nepotism, the young Davan was well educated in military matters and had great respect and appreciation for the traditions and history of his people. After some agonizing moments of silent thought, he started issuing orders to the remaining operational ships, trying to prevent a total disaster. As the battle raged on, the heavily outnumbered Davan managed to reacquire cohesion under the new lead and formed a battle wall adequate enough to avoid the assaulting raiders from outmaneuvering and flanking their formations. The fleet was barely holding the enemy at bay. The rear admiral and the rest of the command staff knew that it was only a matter of time before the battle turned into a one-sided massacre. Having lost almost all the screening ships after hours of fighting, most of the remaining hulls in fighting condition were capital ships, and they were at serious risk of being overwhelmed by sheer numbers and waves of starfighters. In this moment of desperation to save the life of his subordinates and avoid a galaxy-wide shame to his species, the rear admiral suggested something quite unbefitting of a true Davan officer: "We should call for help." Hearing this outrageous proposal, the enraged captain proclaimed, "I would rather go down with my ship than survive and be forced to bow down to our saviors." After some back-and-forth discussions about honor, loyalty, and the value of life, the rear admiral, who had been very respectful of his more experienced officer up until now, decided to pull rank on him and ordered a distress signal to be sent out to all nearby allies. "Sir, this is not only extremely shameful and dishonorable, but it will seriously impact our already precarious diplomatic position. We run the risk of becoming the laughingstock of the coalition." "That's enough, Captain. There's no honor in a preventable death. The fact we have been in this fight for this long with the forces we have is already a great sign of military prowess of which everyone here should be proud. If we make it back, not only will we be covered in medals, but we will be on par with other coalition members." "Not sure about the last part, sir. We are getting decimated by a third-rate empire here. Comparing us to the Sealan and Rugans is a bit of a stretch, if I'm being honest." The captain was cut off by a large explosion rocking the ship as lights flickered and sparks lit up the control panels. One of the officers shouted amidst the chaos, "Message from Coalition Joint Command, sir. They are asking if we follow the row and if we are within our borders. They want to avoid a diplomatic crisis." "Diplomats? We are in sovereign Duran space, 5 light-years from the recognized buffer zone. We are fighting to protect our domain from the Jerkins," angrily shouted the captain, somehow forgetting all his speeches about honor after violently banging his head after a missile impact. Even more unfortunate for them, another hit completely tore off the ship's main mast, leaving them without long-range comms just as they were about to send a reply. Crippled and in complete disarray, the Sky Serpent was forced to back away and take cover in the rear of the already battered formation. As the battle continued, the center started to lose cohesion and the flanks were on the brink of being overrun. Davan losses were piling up, and there was a serious possibility of an uncoordinated rout. It was then that a single ship exited from hyperspace in the rear of the formation. Detecting it with what little sensors remained operational, the rear admiral's ship hurried to identify the unknown vessel. "This is the Sky Serpent of the Davan Stargo fleet. Identify yourself." After some agonizing seconds of silence, the mysterious vessel sent a reply from the void of space that somehow both reassured and upset the old captain. "This is C-39, a frigate of the Human Astral Navy. We detected your distress signal and were sent by Coalition Joint Command to confirm your status." Hearing that the ones who came to save them were humans, the captain let out a grumble with a clearly upset facial expression. Noticing his behavior, the rear admiral asked him about it, somewhat fearful these humans would not be enough to turn the tide of this battle. "No, sir, it's quite the contrary. I was there when the human ships arrived over Turak. Well, you will see. We will be laughed at by those Turan for at least 3 generations." Turning towards the communications officers, the captain ordered a brief description of the situation to the newcomers, adding that an extensive report would only be a waste of time. "C-39, the situation is critical. Over 250 enemy vessels, including 38 battleships and 17 carriers. Our own forces have been reduced to 45% effectiveness, with virtually every unit having suffered damages. We are unable to maintain formation. A bit confused and skeptical, the young admiral asked his subordinate to elaborate, only to be interrupted by the Terran's reply, "Understood. We were sailing with elements from the 34th Heavy Cruiser Squadron and the 110th Escort Squadron. We are the only coalition naval units within fast jump range to the current coordinates. We will assist you as best as possible." "What? We are doomed. How did you even think of coming to help us with so few vessels? C-39, I request you to leave the premises. We do not need to shed your blood as well," screamed the Rear Admiral, wanting to preserve at least his honor as a commander. "We appreciate your concerns, sir, but we are under direct orders of Grand Admiral Wian, commander of the 3rd Star Fleet. We will fight alongside you as allies are meant to." Moved by the apparent loyalty and devotion to the cause, the young officer shed a tear and was ready to die with these humans he had just met. As he was drying his cheeks, he noticed how the old captain had a rather indifferent expression, as if there was nothing to worry about, as if they weren't about to go down guns blazing. Looking around, he realized all the senior officers had the same attitude, indifferent but relieved, a bit annoyed even. Fearing his men finally lost it because of the stress, he dared to ask what was going on in their minds. "Oh, nothing, sir. Just thinking of what I could have for dinner. Actually, I should tell the cook to start preparing the meals. This is going to be over quickly." The Rear Admiral was about to give up on everything and accept his fate when the humans sent one last message. "We might have the equivalent of 4 cruisers and a tugboat on hand, but we will give them hell." As they were reading the message in disbelief, the Davan crew watched from the bridge as a large ship flew past them, headed straight for the enemy wall of cannons and missiles. After dodging the damaged vessels and plowing through the wrecks and debris, the human frigate increased the already impressive speed to a ludicrous battle speed that was pretty much twice that of any other Davan vessel. Looking at the angular jet-black ship, her silhouette was almost indistinguishable by the naked eye as the deep space camouflage made her blend perfectly with the background emptiness of interplanetary void. The only exceptions were her massive glowing thrusters whose nozzles were contracting and focusing swiftly, vectoring and changing the ship's angle of attack to let the sleek hull effortlessly glide around the less fortunate chunks of steel. Is that a frigate? It's the size of one of our heavy cruisers. And how is it so agile and fast? What are their intentions? Are they crazy? Never seen humans in action, huh? It's clear you have no experience fighting with our coalition allies. Take a seat. We are just a sideshow now. As soon as the human ship rushed out of the field of debris and wreck that once were proud vessels, dozens of Jaren vessels aimed their barrels and remaining missiles at the bold frigate rapidly approaching. Soon enough, the fearless warship could be seen avoiding the slow plasma bolts, executing a mesmerizing mechanical dance as control surfaces and side thrusters were put to use to their full extent. The moment missiles were launched against her from the alloy belly of C-39, numerous lines of hatches opened one after the other to unleash their own missiles to intercept the incoming ones. The empty area separating the two formations was once again filled with rays of light and sentient needles of death. After a previous lull in the fight, the humans' autocannons and close-in defense systems started tearing through the void, filling the cold emptiness of space with bright yellow and hot tracer rounds. As the barrage of missiles was simply too large to be fully intercepted, the ship's hardware and crew had to sustain even harsher and more demanding evasive maneuvers. Heavy flares, chaff, and optical countermeasures were deployed as the frigate pushed to flank speed while performing an aileron roll, leaving behind a spiral trail of bright lights and particles extending through space like a comet swept by solar winds. "What is this? What are they even doing?" asked the young Davan in disbelief. "They are showing off." Having evaded or tanked the horde of missiles, the human ship was now at the same distance from the two fleets. Still dodging the odd plasma bolts, a spherical object was ejected from the ship's superstructure, roughly the size of a cop boulder. As soon as the strange contraption was set free, C-39 quickly turned around and performed an emergency jump, disappearing from the battlefield. After a few seconds of laying there doing nothing, the mysterious sphere emitted a series of extremely bright lights, seemingly scanning its vicinity. Looking at the sensors, one would have noticed that this thing was also emitting electromagnetic pulses and listening to gravitational waves. "What now? Is that a bomb? Did they just take off? Are we all going to die?" asked the Rear Admiral yet again with a resigned tone. "No, sir. That's a hyperspace beacon." "A what?" He could not even ask the next question as out of nowhere, for enormous ships accompanied by a handful of smaller warships, slightly bigger than the one that had just left, jumped in. What was even more impressive was that all the ships exited hyperspace right next to each other around the so-called beacon. It is very hard, if not impossible, to exit from hyperspace in a precise location even with the assistance of a supercomputer, exclaimed the Rear Admiral. The experienced captain quickly explained, those bastards managed to find a way to lock in on a signal while traveling at ultra-relativistic speed in a different dimension. Don't ask me how. Basically, the beacon scans the position, mass, and velocity of any object around it and sends out a coded signal. Newer and upgraded human ships can detect and home in on these specific signals. The required information is relayed to the ship's NAV drives that communicate with each other to jump out in a coordinated manner without smashing into each other. During large-scale naval engagements, up to hundreds of these beacons are deployed so that incoming ships can select where to join the battle with higher tactical awareness of their surroundings and unprecedented accuracy. To testify to the captain's statement, as soon as the human ships showed up, they had their cannons already pointed at the nearest targets, letting out a devastating salvo that took out over 20 ships in a matter of seconds. Not content, the heavy cruisers and their escorts elegantly opened their missile cells akin to a pretty lady lifting her skirt to show the holstered .44 Magnum hanging on her thigh. Thousands of missiles swarmed the Gerran ships that were mostly left without countermeasures and defensive missiles after the prolonged fight. In the blink of an eye, more than 1/4 of the opposing formation was reduced to floating scrap metal, as another good chunk was left heavily damaged or outright crippled. Before the tremendous show of force, the enemy fleet quickly deployed smoke screens and started to retreat, having technically beaten the Daven and achieved the main objective of their raid by seriously degrading their direct rivals' naval power. The Rear Admiral, excited and waiting to exact revenge for his fallen comrades, anxiously waited for the humans to give chase or let out a new volley of missiles. When after minutes of nothing happening, he asked what was going on. The Terran's reply left him a bit unsatisfied, but it was not like he was in any power to protest. This is C-056, 34th Heavy Cruiser Squadron, 3rd Star Fleet. Enemy vessels are disengaging. You should start withdrawal procedures. We will act as rear guard. No. Why aren't you going after them? I mean you, must inflict as many losses as possible on those savages. Sorry, sir. We are not here to massacre them but to fend them off. If you want to declare war, you will have to get Coalition Joint Command approval before any Allied unit will join you in your campaign. We are also out of missiles. We used all the ones we had trying to scare them away while using long-range comms to fake the imminent arrival of additional units. If they come back for a second serving, I'm afraid we will have to serve them empty plates. We still have our guns, but it would be impossible to repel them all with so few naval assets. We are basically bluffing them. Understanding, the Rear Admiral issued the order of retreat. While hurt in body and spirit, half of the battered fleet was still somewhat floating and could be repaired or salvaged. What no one was prepared for were the centuries of jokes and banter that the coalition members would cast upon the poor Davens for having their mighty fleet almost obliterated by a third-rate power and having been saved by a single-digit number of human ships that happened to pass by.